Hello everybody, and welcome back to today's video. In today's video, we'll be talking about some Rust Belt governorships and how I think they're going to vote. I now notice that my face cam is on. I don't really care too much about it. I don't, it doesn't really matter. I was having a bit of a problem filming this. This is why, if you recall correctly, the video from yesterday had no audio. So I had to reset my recorder, and it will not let me record without face cam, I guess. And so that's okay. Obviously not exactly a supermodel over here, but we're just going to do our best. Um, I want to start, just going to get right into this here. I want to start off with, I think, the two states that don't really matter as much in this discussion. These are the states that I don't think have any real potential to vote the other way. And so these states are Minnesota for the Democrats and Ohio for the Republicans. And I say that because I think when you look at the data in both these states, there's no path for the other party to come back and win. Starting in Minnesota, the Republican nominee here, Scott Jensen, he has very little money. He's not really being funded by national Republicans. If I recall correctly, back in the summer, he literally only like $90,000 in terms of cash on hand. And so he's had problems fundraising and actually competing on the airwaves with the incumbent Democratic Governor Tim Walz. And Walz is already a popular incumbent. He won by double digits in 2018. He's not, someone who's really was in danger to begin with. And Jensen, he isn't like a polarizing figure or anything. It's just he doesn't have the money to compete. And I think Minnesota's a blue leading state. That really shouldn't be a problem for the Democrats to hold. And then as for Ohio, Ohio's going to be even less contested. I don't think it'll even be within 10. I'd be pretty surprised if it's anything close to that. Mike DeWine's the incumbent Republican governor here. He's very popular. A lot of Democrats are going to be voting for him because he's perceived to be more moderate. He's very well liked in the suburbs, and he's been polling quite well. And if you take a look at his opponent Nan Whaley, similar to Scott Jensen in Minnesota, she hasn't really gotten a ton of national funding. She's not necessarily like a bad or polarizing candidate. It's just that the other parties haven't, or her state or her nationwide and statewide parties haven't really invested in their races or taken the races very seriously, which is why even though these states could have been competitive in different circumstances, they, were never really in play because the incumbents were strong, because the challengers never were able to raise money. Now, these three states have been in play, and they've, they're going to be fairly close on election night, I would say, although I do think that there are clear favorites in all three of these races, which is why I'm able to kind of articulate a convincing argument in all three. But what I will tell you is that we're going to learn a lot, especially from Pennsylvania, because the polls closed fairly early there. And it'll be interesting to see how these early returns look for Josh Shapiro and Doug Mastriano there. So I think that's the best way to start. Pennsylvania, I think we'll start there. Now, I want to show you my polling aggregate, which I have made by myself. Obviously, it's just kind of an aggregate of all of the polls, but chucking out some of the bad Democratic internals, although I do keep in the Republican ones. As you can see here, we actually have no Democratic internals in Pennsylvania. We only have some yellow nonpartisan polls and some red Republican internals, but they all show the same thing. They all show a fairly solid result here for Josh Shapiro. Coefficient Republican internal, he's up by 10. He's up by 6 in WIC, which has Dr. Oz winning, by the way. Insider Advantage has him up by 8. Rasmussen has him up by 3. Insider Advantage again had him up by 6. For Rubio, this is Trump's pollster, has him up by 11. Falker has him up by 9. The nonpartisan polls show a similar thing, actually. It's interesting that they all kind of agree on who's going to win. YouGov has Shapiro up by 9. CNN has him up by 16. That's a pretty big margin. Suffolk has him up by 11. Emerson has him up by 10. Fox has him up by 11. And Franklin Marshall has him up by 14. So there's not too much variance there. I think they all kind of agree Shapiro's headed for a pretty easy victory. Now, on the surface, that looks really bad for Doug Mastriano, and I think you can make that case. What I will say is that I think partisanship is going to save him. Dr. Ross is clearly still in this fight. It's going to be really close. I think it's going to be within 2 points either way in that Senate race. But I think Dr. Ross being competitive statewide is, gives Mastriano a reasonable floor, and that's what's going to allow him to keep turnout decently high in rural areas. Again, it won't be like super high like it was in 2020, but it'll be decently high, and that'll give him some level of support. It'll kind of cap how badly he can do. And again, polarization is going to help him out here. There'll be a lot of Republicans who will vote for him even though they don't like him. Now, the caveat to this is that, again, Shapiro is a big overperformer in 2016 and 2020. He outran Clinton and Biden by, I want to say, 4 points. It was still a very good showing for him. And, as Attorney General, he was fairly popular. He's outspending Mastriano like 40-1. He has like 30-something million cash in hand. Mastriano doesn't even have he hasn't even spent, he spent 3 million. Shapiro spent like 50 or 60 million. So, real ugly there for Mastriano. And if you look at the early vote data in Pennsylvania, it is looking weirdly encouraging for the Democrats, because right now they have about a 406,000 ballot advantage over the GOP, and they're building a bit of a firewall. It's going to be quite formidable for the Republicans on election day. Obviously, not all the Democrats are voting for Shapiro. Not all these Republicans are voting for Mastriano. But it is interesting that the Democrats are already building up a firewall and they, haven't even concluded early voting. If you take a look at the return rate, Democrats beating Republicans there despite having requested more ballots. And, the counties that are coming out big for Democrats are Allegheny, which is where Pittsburgh is, Dauphin, which is where Harrisburg is, and Lackawanna, which is where Scranton is. Philadelphia is all right for Democrats right now. It could be a lot better for them, but it isn't terrible. So I think Democrats right now are feeling pretty good about Pennsylvania. And so as a result of that, I'm going to put this race at lean Democratic. And honestly, I've seen people put it as likely, and that's a fair rating. I will not ever get mad at anyone for having Pennsylvania as a likely D state at this stage. I'm only putting it as lean out of an abundance of caution because I do think Mastriano will do maybe a little better than people expect. I've seen people who think he's going to lose by like 10 or 11. I just don't think that's within play here. But he's still a clear underdog, and he's still I'd still be really surprised if he does win this race, despite the fact that it's a competitive state in other instances. Now, let's talk about the state of Michigan here. It's our next state here. Who's going to win. So Whitmer right now looks like she's on track. And if you look at the polls, she's doing quite well. As you can see right now, she leads the average that on 538 by 5.5. I have her up by 3.2. Again, this average, I've kind of chucked out all the bad, Democratic internal polls. There are some polls in 538 that have Whitmer up by like 30, and it's just, there's really no point in including them because they're just so, they undersample Republicans. They have unrealistic results. I'm just not going to put that in my average. So I have some Republican internals here. Then I have some neutral polls. Signal, GOP internal, has her up by 6. Trafalgar, which had Trump winning Michigan in 2020 by a couple points, has Whitmer up by 1. Signal, again, had Whitmer up by 5 a few weeks ago. Insider Advantage, also Trump winning Michigan, and has Whitmer up by 1. The only poll Dixon's winning is WIC, which, again, had Trump winning Michigan by, I think, 3% in 2020, and they have Dr. Oz and Lee Zeldin winning. So Oz winning is a quite likely outcome. I wouldn't say it's guaranteed, but I think, he's in a toss-up race right there. And then in terms of New York, Lee Zeldin might come close for a Republican, but I'd still be pretty surprised if he does win. And so that is kind of why I'm counting on this WIC poll being wrong. Because again, if you apply for 2020 polling, they missed by, almost 4% in 2020. Obviously, I don't do all of it. I only do some of it, but again, it still gets you to a lead. Now, the counterpoint to that is that Mitchell, which is a poll, it's neutral, they overestimated Democrats by a lot in 2020. They're, within that margin of error. So, I adjust for all of it, and, you get an average there. But I think this is kind of the floor for Whitmer, considering this is such an aggregate that's so friendly to Tudor Dixon. I think she'll win by closer to 4%, maybe 4.5%. She's a popular governor. She's polling well. The early returns look really good for Democrats right now. As you can see, they have a 22% request advantage, if that's what you call it, and they have a 25% return advantage, which means they're outpacing their own requests by about 3%. So Michigan, I'd say right now, is looking quite solid for Gretchen Whitmer. It's not it's not ball game yet, but she's a popular governor. Like I said, Tudor Dixon doesn't have enough money to compete on the airwaves. She's getting massively outspent, but that's what I'm going to say. I think Whitmer's in a pretty good spot here, but an upset is possible. Now, Wisconsin, this is an interesting race, and I have some hot takes on Wisconsin. I know a lot of people have disagreed with in the past. So here's something I will say. Tony Evers is in a really bad spot right now, and I think a lot of people don't talk about it. So my polling aggregate has him down by 1.4%, which I think is generous, by the way. I think it might be down by a lot more right now. If you take a look at the average on 538, he's up by 0.4, okay? But if you adjust for 2020 polling mist, he's down by like fairly close amounts in most of these seats, or most of these polls, excuse me. And, Fabrizio and Trafalgar have him down by 3 and 1 respectively. Even CNN and Marquette have him within, their margin of error, and they massively overstated Democratic support in Wisconsin in 2020. These polls had Biden winning it by like 8-9%, and they're just really bad. And, the fact they're showing a close race now, even some having Tim Michaels leading like DFP, like Fox and YouGov having it tied. That's really good for Tim Michaels. He's been running a really good campaign. I think he's underratedly one of the better candidates the Republicans have fielded this year. And I think when you look at how he's doing, how Evers did in 2018, he only won by about a point in a blue wave year, first of all. And he did it against a fairly unpopular incumbent Republican governor who was not really an institution anywhere in the state outside of the WOW counties, which I do think Evers will do better in the WOW counties, which he'll gain a bit of votes from. But Evers did really well in 2018 with working class voters, which I don't think he'll be able to do again. He did really well with rural voters for a Democrat. I don't think he'll be able to do that again in the year as polarized as this. Additionally, he's now underwater in terms of approval rating. He's in a lot of trouble. And if you look at the ballot returns from Wisconsin, I know they don't have party registration. I know it's just modeled. But Democrats, I don't like even if this is anywhere close to correct, I just don't think it's there for them to pull off that upset. I think Tony Evers is a clear underdog. He can still win, but I would be really surprised if he does win. I think it's highly unlikely, and I do think at this point in time, if you take a look at the map of Wisconsin, Everest is going to underperform everywhere except for the WoW counties relative to 2018. And with, turnout on election day, Madison, Milwaukee potentially dropping off, I think it's going to be really concerning if you're a Democrat in Wisconsin. I think it's going to be a really bad year. I think Johnson's going to win re-election. I think Michael's going to pick up that governor seat. And certainly the 3rd district over here that's been held by Democrats for so long is going to flip to Derek Van Orden, the Republican here. So that is my Rust Belt review, I guess, if you want to call it that. I'm pretty confident at this point that we're going to see a bit of a split verdict. One could call it. Mike DeWine is very likely to win Ohio. I think Tim Michels is on track to win Wisconsin, but on the flip side, Tim Walz should win re-election in Minnesota, and then Whitmer and Shapiro are favored to win Michigan. So thank you for watching this video. I know my face is featured in it, so I guess it's a bit of a unique video. I don't think I'll do it again, or maybe I'll have to if this screen recorder is deciding to be weird. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll see you all in the next video, which will be tomorrow. So yeah, we have, we only have what? It's today is Tuesday. It's a week, guys. We have a week to go. So keep watching. I'll post every day, and we're gonna see where we are next week with my final predictions. Stay tuned. Bye, everyone.